views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We continue our series on the election of a new mayor. It's coming up soon. We have two strong candidates, Eric Adams and Dianne Morales. Please stay tuned. It's a strong show. Today's verdict starts right now. Well, we're continuing with our mayoral series, Candidates for Mayor, and we are lucky and happy to have with us Eric Adams. Eric, how are you doing today?
Quite well, quite well. I know you're in the Bronx, so I'm just going to give you the symbol.
Big Bronx ups, and I know you represent Brooklyn, and it's nice to have you here. At least for the Bronx community, my clients in the South Bronx would love to get to know you a little bit. So, tell us a little bit about you. Tell the people in the Bronx, who's Eric Adams?
A native New Yorker, and my story is a New York story. Born in Brownsville, Brooklyn, and I believe two areas of the city that have been denied throughout the years is in the borough of the Bronx, and communities like Brownsville and South Jamaica, Queens, and Harlem, and other areas. Eventually, as a child, my mom was able to move us to South Jamaica, Queens, to buy a small, modest house. And it was challenging. It was extremely difficult. When I was 15, I ran into trouble and I was arrested in the 103rd precinct, the same precinct that Sean Bell was shot and killed in. And the police officers assaulted my brother and me, and it left a major impact on how I viewed law enforcement. And it wasn't until a man named Arthur Miller was killed by chokehold in policing that civil rights leaders encouraged me to go into policing and fight from within. And I did that. And I served 22 years, started an organization called 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care, partnered with the Latino Officers Association, and we fought for reform, became a state senator, and now I'm the borough president of the borough of Brooklyn. And I just believe it's time to really stop betraying everyday New Yorkers, Black, brown, and immigrants in this city, and turn the city around.
There was a big verdict yesterday, the police brutality verdict. And I know you've been in law enforcement. What are your thoughts in terms of how that's going to affect the city, where we're heading? You have a lot of experience with respect to NYPD. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, think about this for a moment. While the trial was going on, we had several questionable shootings. We saw a lieutenant that was from Brooklyn and serving in Virginia, pepper sprayed while in uniform. This treatment is a real turning point for America. We have to change the ecosystem and redefine what policing is like in America. And if we're not honest about that, then we're going to find ourselves back here over and over again. And so I believe that this is a tipping point for our country. We must diversify our police departments, not allow officers with really sadistic mindsets to remain in our police agencies, use our dollars better to encourage non-police engagement for those minor infractions or minor encounters. And so this is a moment I think we need to go back to the drawing board and get policing right in America, because we don't have it right now.
Eric, certainly during crisis, like we've seen during COVID, it's usually the poorest that suffer the most. Certainly my clients economically have been very, very much hurt as a result. Health-wise, it took a while for them just to really get the medical care that they needed. If you're elected, what can we do for those who are at the lowest rung that need probably the most support than anybody else really needs in this city? What are your thoughts about that?
I really want to encourage New Yorkers to hear me deeply when I talk about the operations of the city. I too was dealing with a health crisis. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I lost my sight. The doctor said I was going to be blind in about a year, had permanent nerve damage in my hands and feet. And I was dealing with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and other chronic diseases that many of your clients and others are dealing with. And it was not until I went to and discovered a doctor outside the city who stated, Eric, I can give you medicine for your blood pressure, your vision loss, your cholesterol, your diabetes, but it's really one thing that's impacting all of those health crises. Instead of trying to treat them in a spot way, why not just go to the foundation? And I did that. I changed my diet and lifestyle, and all of those chronic diseases changed. That is what's happening in New York City right now. We are trying to respond to a lack of education, a lack of proper health care, homelessness, affordable housing. All of these topics is still turning to one area. Our city is dysfunctional, David. We create our crises. Archbishop Desmond Tutu state, we spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent people from falling in the first place. We have a downstream government that we professionalize, pulling people out of the river. I say, let's go upstream. If we feed people better food, we'll deal with chronic diseases. If we identify learning disabilities and things like dyslexia early, we will prevent crime. If we show people how to have an upstream mindset, we don't fall in the river and lose people on the way down. It's all the same problem. We're just diagnosing and treating them in separate ways.
The other thing is, you know, a lot of times you need money. It's money for the services, money for the infrastructure. It is what it is. It's money. Where are we getting that from? I know, you had talked about, closing the budget gap without affecting public services. Well, how are we going to do that? How do we get the people who left New York to come back, the tax revenue? It's a tough situation. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I would. I believe it's a tough situation, but at the same time, I know it's doable. And I'm used to being in tough situations. I was a rookie cop during the mid 80s and early 90s when we were having 2,000 homicides a year. And I was part of a small team of police officers that created a system called OLTPS, where we started using data to identify crime patterns. And we went from being reactive to proactive to predictive, and it turned around how we looked at crime in the city. We no longer were experiencing 2,000 homicides a year, 98,000 robberies, and an equivalent amount of felonious assaults. And so I know what tough turnarounds look like and how to take something dysfunctional and make it functional. And that is what we're doing now. We're going to receive about $10 billion, $6 billion from the federal government, 3.5 is coming from the state through the Fed, from the Fed, but through the state, and almost $500 million is coming from what's called sports betting. Now the question becomes, do we use this influx of one-shot monies and dollars to take away the pre-existing inequalities that existed and put real systems in place, or do we do business as usual?
I want to move a little bit into the homeless issue because,
yes.
I live in Manhattan. I'm born and bred Queens Village. I work in the South Bronx. I've seen the city. I know my city, I see what's going on the streets. There are many people who are homeless now, and I don't think we have a real path forward. What are we going to do about helping these people move into either shelters or hotels? It's spring and summer now, but it'll be winter soon. So what do we do?
And we do. We have a homeless crisis, but we keep trying to view it from one dimension. Homelessness falls into three categories: children and families, single adults, and those with mental health illnesses. That is the population that you see on the streets every day, and we treat it incorrectly. What we do is that we wait until a person commits an act and we incarcerate them. That's why 48% of the people at Rikers Island have mental health illnesses. Or we give them treatment in a psychiatric facility and medicine for one day, and then we place them back on the streets. I say we need to partner with organizations like Fountain House. They have an 85% rate of allowing people to be self-sufficient and give them the wraparound services they need. That is an upstream way to deal with homelessness. We're not doing that now. Shelter is not the answer.
I want to end with education. I have a 10-year-old. Many people feel that the school system in New York is broken. Certainly virtually, nobody seemed to be particularly happy with the way things transpired. What can we do to level the playing field when it comes to education?
Well, education, we failed and we have betrayed inner city youth in 3 areas. Number one, we failed the future young people. We need to have doulas for mothers to give them the right information as they're carrying their babies. And then we must make sure that there's a seamless continuation from from pre-K to K, and from K to 12, and from 12 through college. And then we have to do something else, continuing ed. There's a lot of young people who are not in our school system that are not participating in the prosperity of the city because they don't have the proper education, job training, and job placement. And so the betrayal must be corrected, and there must be a seamless pipeline to employment or starting your own business in the city, and we have not done that.
I mean, Eric, you've seen a lot of this city. I mean, you've been around, you've seen it, you understand it. I would say it's broken now. I don't know how broken you might say, because maybe it's coming back, but what are your final thoughts about fixing this city? If you were mayor, what would you do? How would you do it? And just what are your final thoughts about making New York great again, if you could?
Well, let's remember this. Cities are made up of agencies. If the agencies are not aligned, if they are siloed, then you're going to continue the dysfunctionalities. Right now, our agencies are inefficient, and those inefficiencies are creating the inequities. I'm going to realign our city to be a mission-driven city, while agencies will operate together to ensure that our taxpayers are receiving what they're paying for. We're not getting our money's worth now.
We'll leave it there. Eric, I want to thank you very much for coming on. The people of the city really appreciate hearing what you have to say. And good luck, by the way.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You got it. All right. Stay with us. Today's Verdict. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to today's Verdict. We have another candidate for mayor joining us today. So excited. Dianne Morales is here. Dianne, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we've been looking forward to meeting you and having you on. I know you seem to be the more progressive out of a lot of the candidates that have been on our show.
So they say.
So they say. My clients in the South Bronx love you. We'd love to talk a little bit about you.
Amazing.
And maybe you could just tell the viewers a little about who are you?
So my name's Dianne Morales. I am the candidate for New York City mayor. I'm, also the daughter of 2 Puerto Ricans, born and raised in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and the proud single mom of 2 now young adults who both had IEPs in the New York City public school system. So I've sort of had some front row experiences navigating that. I've dedicated my entire life actually to creating opportunities for some of our most low income, marginalized Black and brown immigrant communities to access, educational and economic advancement. And, I spent the last decade actually working in the South Bronx as the CEO of an anti-poverty organization there, Phipps Neighborhoods. But, after a while, no matter how successful you are, you recognize that there's some systems bigger, that are bigger at hand and at play in sort of maintaining the inequities. And so I decided to jump in the race for mayor because I think that there's something that I can bring to the table based on my personal and professional experiences that is not represented in this race. And that was before the pandemic. And now we certainly know that some of those inequities and disparities have been further exacerbated and deepened. So it's just time for us to actually put a stake in the ground and transform New York City to become the greatest city in the world, which it really can be.
Certainly, the zip code that I practice law in, 10451, has, really been hit hardest by the pandemic. As you had mentioned, you see what ends up happening when something like this happens, health-wise, financial-wise. What would you do? What can we do to get everybody back to at least where they were before the pandemic? And then we'll talk about what to do from there. How can we just get them to catch up a little bit?
Yeah, so a couple of responses to that, right? I mean, I'll try to be succinct. One is that, our sort of desire to kind of come up with one solution to address what is a complex, multitude of issues, I think is problematic, right? We need to recognize that there's a lot of issues at play here. So we need some comprehensive solutions that are multi-pronged. That being said, I also think we need to, whatever we do to move forward has to be with an eye towards actually not getting back to normal, because we've got to recognize and acknowledge in this moment that all of the things that were wrong is what allowed this past year to be as hard as it has been. So
the inequities were exposed. I mean, it was obvious.
Absolutely. They were exposed, they were deepened, they were widened in a way that I personally can't unsee, and I don't think any of us should try to, right? So, I think about what do we need to do to save people's lives right now? Because while some of the, for example, some of the, COVID rates are decreasing, we still have people that are dying, right? So what do we need to do to save people's lives? And then what do we need to do to build back? And for me, part of that means providing some basic economic security, guaranteeing housing for everybody, because we've also seen that you separate public housing from public safety or public health, and then rebuilding our economy in a new way that actually focuses on our small and mid-sized businesses, because we also don't always acknowledge that small and mid-sized businesses employ 50% of New Yorkers, right? And that's an invaluable resource here.
Well, I'll take you from where I sit and where they come into the office more often than not, and it's always it's the housing, it's the crumbling of the infrastructure, it's the ceilings that fall on them, it's the locks that are broken, the security issues. NYCHA, that's what I see. That's what I see every day coming into the office. Yes, I've been seeing that the food lines and the pantry lines too, but what I see is when the clients come in and they tell me, I can't live in this apartment with the bed bugs. I can't be in here with the mold. Yeah. What can we do about that? What I seem to see on a daily basis in the South Bronx.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really need to demand a reinvestment in NYCHA. We've been divesting from NYCHA for decades. And that's what you're seeing, right? The result of that is that divestment. I've committed to, at least in the first year, investing at least $1.5 billion in addition to the current operating budget, and also seeking a match of that from the state level. I also think, there's something to be said for the federal relief package. But I think, the other thing ultimately that we need to do is we need to look towards democratizing NYCHA and giving residents the power to sort of control their own destiny much more so than we have right now. That includes, leading the board of NYCHA. And I've also called for the creation, at least in year one, of a pilot program that would identify one development in each borough and create a resident-owned, managed, and operated management company for those developments, right? So that they can begin to self-determine the status and the conditions of their lives. And we'd also be generating jobs for the residents.
Let's broaden the discussion a little bit, because as mayor, there's so many more communities to govern than just the South Bronx. I understand that as well. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit. I can even just see behind you the book Critical Race Theory. There's so much, I'm sure, that's going on in terms of appeasing everybody, which is such a difficult thing to do. how do we get those who have left to come back, to increase the tax revenue, to get the city to kind of rebuild while still changing so that those marginalized communities can still be heard? Tough question. I don't know if you can answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the narrative about those who have left, quite honestly. I think it was the New York Times last week, maybe Friday, that published something about the rising rates of home ownership in the city, and the people that are buying homes. I think actually the people that we really lost were some of the more vulnerable folks who could no longer afford to be here. And so I think about, really, from an economic perspective, what do we do with the dollars that we do have access to, that we do have control of? We're still the richest city in the country. And we have to make decisions about how we allocate the resources that we have differently so that we're prioritizing some of our most vulnerable. And I've also been a proponent and a supporter of the idea of taxing the rich. We've seen that the last year we had more people become vulnerable and marginalized, while we also generated more millionaires and billionaires.
Well, do you feel that there has been a little bit of a diminished safety as people walk throughout the city? I know you're for defunding the police. There have been cities that have gone downhill and never came back. Are you fearful that we're on a little bit of a slippery slope? I mean, we may not want to get some people back because maybe they're not really helping out and they have enough money, let them stay where they are. But at some point, I do think we need New York to kind of strengthen up a little bit. Well, you tell me, what is your feeling on it? Where's the happy medium?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can decouple what we've seen in terms of from a safety perspective. We can't decouple that from the increasing insecurity that New Yorkers have experienced over the last 14 months, right? We're talking about increased housing insecurity, increased food insecurity. We're talking about not providing universal access to healthcare in the middle of a pandemic, right? We've pushed people to the edge. And, it's no wonder that people are increasingly anxious and frustrated and feeling a sense of despair because we haven't prioritized actually taking care of people. So I think if we want to rebuild our city, we actually have to prioritize caring for people and making it possible for people to live in dignity. And I believe that there's a direct correlation between that and how safe we can be. I can't be safe if my neighbor's not safe.
Do you feel, basically, because you are a strong candidate with the progressive stance, that you've been either unfairly attacked or hit from particular sides about, well, it's very easy to say, let's give to everybody, or let's give to those who don't have, but there's another section of this city that themselves are now feeling marginalized, and whether it's right or wrong, that's how they feel.
Yeah.
What do you say to those? Because as mayor, you govern everybody. So what do you say to those people who feel for the first time, hey, I'm losing my city. I don't feel safe as I walk down the streets. I just don't. I'm not feeling this. The security of New York. What do you say to those people?
Yeah. Part of what I say to those people is that I think, it's time to actually recognize and acknowledge, and it doesn't have to be an indictment, but to recognize and acknowledge that the people that helped keep the city operating over the course of the last 14 months, the people that delivered our food while we stayed comfortably at home and basically took care of the essential services in the city, put their lives on the line in order to do that. And yet they have been the most vulnerable, the least protected, and experienced the largest rate of fatalities. And that those people are disproportionately Black and brown.
That's true.
Right?
That's
true.
So,
it's just a recognition of, wow, we really need them. And now they need us. Right. So we're going to actually take care of each other, and we're going to, the notion that a rising tide lifts all boats, that if, we can take care of our most vulnerable, we actually will ultimately all benefit from that. So this is not an either or. It's not an, me or you. It's an us and we thing. The recognition that we're all in this together, and we've got to work together to get out of it.
So we don't have too much time, but let's say you're elected, you're there. The first thing, what's the first thing that you attack? Infrastructure, police. I know you said, well, I do it all at the same time, but what's that thing that Diane says, this is my first priority, this is where I'm going head first? What's the first thing?
Yeah, so there's two things that come to mind. Just two things. One is really sort of the deep dive in the budget so that we can begin the divesting from policing and really investing in the things that make communities safe. And I think that's a critical thing. And as part of that comes the idea of housing and how do we move to provide and ensure that we are addressing the housing crisis, both in terms of the folks who are homeless and also in terms of those who are housing insecure. I think those things have to come in tandem, because I think housing, and access to housing is a critical pillar to the idea of creating safety in communities.
Well, I will tell you this, if you are elected, you certainly have your work cut out for you. There's a lot to do, unfortunately, but we're so happy you came on, and hopefully you'll come back and let us know how you're doing, okay?
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate being here and look forward to seeing you soon.
It's our pleasure. All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this. All right, well, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank both our candidates for mayor for joining us. And of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have an issue or anything you'd like me to discuss on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until next time, know your issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you in 2 weeks.